You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast.
Grew up in a Nigerian household, learned how to almost pick some of what was being said in the conversation, but I was never encouraged to speak Yoruba. We're quite clear from the beginning, this is a way through habit-based and consistency you'll be able to learn the language, but we don't promise it's going to be gamified or some kind of amazing invention. We're simply telling you, do a little bit a day and you will get better. My major, and I would love this to happen, is whatever we make from YapTime, we want to invest back into improving the links between Africa and the diaspora.
Stay tuned as we bring you inspiring people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast with your host, Tessa Adamu.
Welcome to the Unlocking Africa podcast, where we explore the innovators, entrepreneurs, policymakers, and business leaders who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. Today we have Andrew Osayemi, the founder of YapTime, a platform helping busy adults learn African heritage languages, starting with Yoruba, through short, daily WhatsApp lessons designed for consistency and confidence. Andrew, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. As always, I like to start from the beginning. I know, Andrew, your career has been anything but conventional, so let's start there because your journey really sets the stage for everything we're going to discuss today. You've gone from trading FX derivatives in London and New York to producing a hit TV show to now leading a tech-enabled language learning platform. What's the common thread that ties all these chapters together?
It goes back to, and I'm going to take you all the way back to when I was probably like 3 or 4 years old. And my parents came over from Nigeria to the UK to study, and I was born in London. But my parents, they was on a student visa, per se. So we had in our room, I think in our front room in Peckham, we had this massive trunk. And the trunk was filled with all of the stuff that if we got deported, for example, we could throw into a trunk and take it back to Nigeria.
Okay.
So I was always brought up almost on borrowed time, so that you need to make hay while the sun is out, right? You need to make use of any opportunities while you have it, because you never know if something's going to come into your life and completely disrupt it, like being deported, for example. So that's probably the common thread through my whole career, whereas I've got an opportunity, I've got an idea, look, I can't rest. As you know, as they say in Africa, you can't dull, you have to just make it happen. And that's been the common thread in whatever I do, that, you know, tomorrow is not promised, make it happen today.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. So I guess on the theme of disruption and that kind of disconnection, you've always been very open about not being able to speak your mother tongue, native tongue, Yoruba, which you described almost as a personal secret. So how did that emotional or cultural disconnect influence the creation of YapTime?
I'd say it's almost sad, really, because me giving away my age. So, I mean, I'm in my early 40s and grew up in a Nigerian household, learned how to almost pick some of what was being said in the conversation, but I was never asked to reply back in Yoruba or to encourage to speak Yoruba. And I think it was from a misguided perception of, and I think a lot of immigrant African families have this, of focus on English. You know, they want their kids to be better spoken in English, and they feel learning an African language is going to be almost take the kid back in terms of they may have an accent or loads of misguided things, right? But this is probably why I didn't speak. And I think once you learn how not to speak your language, it almost becomes like a personal embarrassment. So you don't speak it because you're worried if you try to speak something, you can be laughed at. Africans are quite notoriously quite harsh when, trying to dissect your tone and you haven't said this correct, or you should say this better. So again, many, many years, like, years after years, I had that dream of wanting to speak Yoruba, but never ever committed to it. So that's what fueled it. And I just said, you know what, beginning of this year, I said, look, I have to. My son now is 10. He's asking, Dad, how come you can't speak a language? Or why don't you speak to me Yoruba? And it was getting embarrassing to the point where I said, look, at least try and fail rather than just try and see what could happen.
Keeping on the theme of trying to learn Yoruba, what was the turning point or maybe the moment where you realised that there's probably a different way that is more suitable for yourself to learning Yoruba? It isn't about the intensity, but maybe more about the consistency.
Yeah, I think I can't remember the name of this YouTube video I watched. Maybe it was a TED Talk. And it really reframed how I thought about languages. The key theme was, it's not about perfection. You just want to make something permanent. So it was almost like, the phrase is practice until you're perfect. I think the person said the practice until permanent. They said, don't worry about perfection, because I was always focused on perfection. I needed to be able to speak Yoruba in the most authentic accent. But when I watched this, I was looking at the YouTube video, it said, look, don't worry about perfection, just worry about making it permanent. And that's when I felt, okay, how do I make it consistent? How do I make it part of my daily life? How do I make it a habit? And that's where I discovered or thought about, okay, what other examples in my life have I tried to tackle a difficult thing? And very recently, I've been trying to run marathons.
Okay.
And the whole concept of marathons is just consistency over time will allow you to build up, to be able to have the strength and endurance to run a marathon. And I thought, could I do the same with languages? Could I do a little bit a day, and would that be able to build up and compound and allow one to learn a language rather than trying to do a lot in one day, like an hour or 2 hour lesson, and you come back another week, you do an hour or 2 hour lesson, and then before you know it, you lose motivation. Is it better just do small chunks every day versus a big chunk once a week or once every 2 weeks?
Thank you for sharing that. So you've shared in terms of your own experiments of a couple of minutes, 10 minutes a day here or there, a simple approach that resonated so strongly for you and now for thousands of learners. Many people in the African diaspora want to connect with their heritage, languages. What gap do you think specifically YapTime fills that other typical language apps don't?
Yeah, the thing about YapTime is we don't promise it's going to be easy.
Yeah.
Because, again, going to my marathon, running a marathon is not easy. And what I love by when you start that, that in the beginning. I think the mistake that a lot of, and again, I'm going to call out, apps like Duolingo, which are fantastic, really good, but they make you feel like it's easy. And it's not going to be easy. All right. So I think that's what we're quite clear from the beginning. Look, this is a way that through habit-based and consistency, you'll be able to learn the language, but we don't promise it's going to be gamified or it's going to be like some kind of amazing invention. We're simply telling you, do a little bit a day and you will get better. It's not every day. So, we try and give people we call this method from marathon training, periodization. So, we try and do maybe Monday to Friday and then the weekend off for the brain to recover. And then we go again Monday to Friday. So, the body has time to rest and then you go again and then you go again and then you go again. And then over time, so many of our students have just seen those compound effects of just doing a little bit a day, really focusing on it. We don't say you need to do homework or extra practice. Because you're doing it daily, the lesson is your practice almost. And it seems to work. It seems to work. And again, this is just one style of learning. Some people would want to have, an hour learning on Zoom with all different type of tools. But we find for busy professionals, this works really well.
I've just realised we've been talking for a little while now and we haven't even mentioned when YapTime was launched. Could you give us a bit more information in terms of when you launched it, how many users you currently have?
Yeah, no, we're still really in the very early stages. So it was launched this year. So it was launched officially probably like the middle of summer, end of summer, August, September. And we're still in the very early stages. We have a good number of users. You know, I can't share like the exact number of users that we have, but we have a good number of users across the world, UK, US, and Europe. And the common theme that they do have is they are all kids who grew up in African households, Nigerian households, who are looking to learn their language and they're yearning to reconnect with their language.
Yeah, so that was going to be the next question in terms of what has been more or less the motivational driving force behind the users wanting to learn the language.
Yeah, I think they're very similar to myself. It's that, you know, we have a core group of our users are people, you know, in their 30s and 40s, just questioning, not focusing on why they wasn't taught their language, focusing on how they can learn the language and fix it. Because I have met so many people that almost were quite angry. And they were angry almost at their parents, right? That, you know, my parents didn't teach me. My parents didn't, you know, growing up, they should have taught me. And while that is true, I think we need to have grace and just realize that, you know, our parents had so much, you know, especially coming to a new country to learn. And maybe they dropped the ball in that regard, but look at what else they were able to accomplish for us, right?
Yes.
So I think our users, they take the initiative themselves and say, look, I will learn this language. And they're in their 30s and 40s. Some may have young kids and are kind of being, you know, their kids are making them feel accountable, like, why don't you learn? And then others want their kids to learn and they realize that they can't speak. So they're incentivized to learn. Yeah, but it's just all about reconnecting. I think when you can't speak your native tongue, there's some part of you that feels like it's missing.
Yes.
And I think that's what we're trying to solve. Like I said, starting with Yoruba, but expanding to all different, like, you know, major African languages.
Fantastic. So let's dive deeper into YapTime. The model revolves around WhatsApp-based audio lessons. There's no complex apps, there's no videos, no grammar-heavy modules. But how scalable would you say this tutor-led model is for your future plans for growth and expansion?
Yeah, do you know what? It's a really good question. I'm going to say something that's quite controversial. I'm going to say it isn't scalable.
Okay.
It isn't scalable. But it's not scalable to the extent of when, you know, Tesco's probably had their first store and they probably thought, how are we going to have thousands of Tesco's stores? They probably didn't think about that at the beginning. So I am trying to solve it as we go along rather than think about how do I scale it. And the reason I say this is because ultimately, I know I've had so many people say to me, you know, the way you scale this is through AI, right? You have students talk to AI bots and they teach you how to speak Yoruba or Swahili or Igbo or Tree. And I fundamentally disagree because I feel that loses the human element.
Yes.
So while everyone says, Andrew, what you're doing is not scalable, my job is to figure out how do I scale it if it gets to that point? But right now, how do I focus on the goals of our customers? And those are people who are learning. And even if I touch 100, 1,000, 10,000 students, and that's the max we can do, at least I've achieved my goal in life.
I like that you're taking a customer-centric approach, which is quite important in today's kind of tech-led, AI-led innovation space that we find ourselves. As you mentioned, you're solving it as you go along without giving us too much of your trade secrets. What have you learned so far while solving it in terms of the scalability?
Yeah, I've learned a few things. One, most important about the customer. The customer is very busy. So we're competing with, like, look, let's look at the average African customer that we're looking at. You know, they're quite affluent, well-educated, you know, they're quite ambitious. So they've got a lot of pressure on their time. So my job is to make it as seamless as possible so it fits in with their busy day. Otherwise, we will lose. Like some of our customers have told me, they're also learning another language like French, like a major language, or Spanish. So I need to figure out, how do I make it fit within their current lives? They've got kids, they've got busy jobs. How do I make it fit? And the way we make it fit, I believe, is, again, and that's why we said, we're not going to build our own app. It's not going to be on Zoom, because we felt, again, Zoom feels like work. We want people to make it feel like it's a habit, it's personal, it's part of their daily lives. We actually don't want the separation between your personal life and speaking Yoruba, because we want to, in the future, insert Yoruba into your personal life. And we felt having that barrier of like a Zoom screen or Teams, will lead people to resent learning and want people to be looking forward to a lesson and make it feel part of their daily lives. So that's been the biggest thing me and the team have had to consider at all times, is how do we make it feel part of people's daily life? We don't really give any homework, because again, we don't want it to feel as a burden. So we would rather the people learn on the lesson, and because it's daily, it's just that, repetition, retention, that allows people to learn. So it's mainly from, like you said, a customer-centric side of what will keep a busy diaspora student going so they can at least achieve their goal. And my job is to get them to the goal. So whatever stops that happening is something, even from the price. We could charge a lot more for this, because, essentially you get 20 lessons a month, and we're charging you probably like £2 or £3, £4 a lesson. It's quite relatively cheap. But again, if I charge too much, that might be a barrier to some people to say, you know what, I've got other priorities in life. So I've had to think of a way of, how do I get someone to the end goal? And that's everything, a part of our business strategy that we look at.
Fantastic. So I guess linked to the scalability, your tutors are native speakers based in Nigeria, but I'd like to look at this from another perspective in terms of how you turning this employability of native speaking teachers in Nigeria, turning it into an economic opportunity for language instructors on the continent.
Yeah, and this is what really pains me about AI, because I think AI really, really impacts Africa the most.
Yes.
Because if you really think about it, so many people in Africa have thrived with this remote work. The fact that you can work from anywhere. So it's meant that so many people in Nigeria, in Kenya, in South Africa have been able to get access to the global work or become part of the global workforce. And now it seems such, not almost criminal, because of greed, people saying, you know what, let's forget about those people again and let's just give it to robots. And I believe a service like YapTime empowers African brothers and sisters to be able to, there's a benefit from that transfer of knowledge between the native speaker to the diaspora, and then also for their service, a transfer from the diaspora to the native speaker. So we all benefit, everyone wins, everyone grows together. And I think with AI, that strips that. It's a benefit from the diaspora to Silicon Valley, basically, right? And we just completely eradicate and eliminate the native speakers. So that's kind of my view. It may be wrong, but I think by keeping it human-centric is a benefit for everybody.
I agree. As part of this podcast, we like to focus on unlocking Africa's economic potential. Language, identity, and economic opportunity are more connected than people realize. So in what ways do you think heritage languages, learning can strengthen economic ties between the diaspora and the continent?
What you find is, and this is where my tutors, some of them, obviously they have people that they know in the diaspora, but they're not as exposed. So they are learning from the people in the UK and the US. And also the people in the UK and US are learning mannerisms, lingual, what is going on. Even having a bit of patience sometimes when the network sometimes is a bit shaky. You know, but they're all working together, right? And it's that sense of community. That sense of community. I get to see some of the messages that go back and forth between the tutors and the speakers and the students, and it's so empowering. So I do think that learning and that economic transfer, as well as money, but also information and culture, is super important.
Do you think speaking your native language as someone from the diaspora can also influence diaspora investment in ways such as entrepreneurship or even tourism?
Yeah, I believe so. 100%, I believe so. And I think it's because you'll find, even me, now, it's so weird, right? I only used to think in English.
Yes.
You know, I was dream in English. But now, because I speak Yoruba, you know, obviously I'm not 100% fluent, but I'm a lot more better than I was before. Some of my mannerisms, some of the way I'm thinking, some of the way I even talk, I respond, is drawing me closer to Nigeria. And there's that longing. And, you know, maybe I used to travel to Nigeria maybe once a year or once every other year. Now I want to go, like, you know, more regularly because I feel closer. And I think that's what learning your language does. All right. And I want to encourage people, you know, once we have multiple African language, you know, my wife is Igbo. Now I have an incentive to learn Igbo as well. All right. You know, because I want to be able to speak it to impress my in-laws. But then I would feel more at home now if I went to that part of Nigeria. So I think that culture, you know, that culture knowledge transfer. I want people in, like, you know, people who are Ghanaian to learn a Nigerian language. I want people in Nigeria to learn a Ghanaian language. I want, you know, South, West, East, North, you know, everyone to kind of learn each other's languages. And I think that will bond more economic growth, more economic trade, and, you know, just more economic relationships between the different countries.
If we rewind a little bit before YapTime, I mentioned in the introduction you built one of the most recognizable African diaspora sitcoms, Meet the Adebanjos, which ended up on Netflix. What lessons from building and licensing Meet the Adebanjos have proven probably the most valuable as you build YapTime?
Yeah, do you know what? And this is where I think, yeah, remember I said earlier about how, well, by doing YapTime a little bit a day, the knowledge compounds.
Yes.
By me doing Meet the Adebanjos, like the lessons that I learned through building that business, like has really, really translated to me in terms of YapTime. For example, when we started Meet the Adebanjos, we kept it all about what will be authentic to the customer.
Yes.
You know, and there's so many shows that have been there, and the reason why Meet the Adebanjos has stuck was because it was real stories. Basically, me and my co-producer Deborah were cousins, so we literally went back to. I remember it was in the beginning. We're like, what actually happened? What are some of the fun stories
Yes.
that happened when we were growing up? What was our dad like? What was our mum like? Remember, and we were like, oh, remember the aunties that just used to come and stay and never go back, like, you know, stay the same for 2 weeks and they'll end
6
up,
months later.
yeah, moving into your room, kicking you out of your bunk bed, like you're having to sleep in the sitting room because you're taking over. And we're like, let's incorporate that into the show, and that's why our shows felt real. And then in the beginning, we started with. No one knew who we were. I didn't come from a background of media or the creative space. And we just had to start from the ground up. I remember we used to go around handing out flyers, Meet the Adebanjos flyers in Peckham. You know, we used to do partnerships with all different types with the African TV networks to build a community from the ground up. Like way before it got to Netflix. Netflix was almost like the icing on the cake after it's had all its organic underground success. So it's about, you know, you need to really understand who your customer is and really cater to them. And once you do that, like it will build into its own, like, you know, not like, yeah, it will build its own audience, its own fans, its own community, and they will propel it to bigger things. So that's why at YapTime I'm so customer centric, because I believe it's the customers we need to serve first, and then that will grow into something bigger.
You detailed how Meet the Adebanjos became a breakout hit by authentically portraying British Nigerian family life. You produced a show, before the current wave that we're seeing of global African content. What challenges would you say that you faced early on that maybe today's African creators, content makers, producers might take for granted?
Yeah, I think we started before there was probably a major distribution platforms, like YouTube. I mean, again, we started Meet the Adebanjos in 2010. So YouTube was in its infancy. It wasn't even cool to put your content on YouTube.
No.
Back then. Like putting your content on YouTube back then was a sign of you failed. No one wants your content. It's on YouTube. That's what people used to be like, it's on YouTube. It's a web series. Like almost dismissive. Like, okay, you've made a web series. It's dismissive. There wasn't that creator economy like there is now, where YouTubers are stars. It wasn't like that back in that day. So it was in its infancy. But what that did allow us to is very early on. The big difference is when there's not much like the content that you're doing, it's easier to amass fans. So because ours at that time was seen as new, revolutionary, different, we was able to amass a lot of fans. I think it would probably be harder now if we were to launch the same type of show, because there's so much stuff out there. So I think in a way, maybe because there wasn't much competition, we was able to build a fan base quickly, and we didn't benefit as commercially as someone who is doing it now, but I think that allowed us to build something that could last.
Yes.
Because it spoke to people. People come up to me all the time and say, oh my God, I remember. And they're like in their 20s and they say, I remember when I was 10. I used to watch Meet the Adebanjos, and I had a parent come up to me and said, he said, Andrew, I want to really thank you because that's the only show they were able to watch with their kids.
Wow.
And they said every other show was either an adult show or a kid show. But he said Meet the Adebanjos was the only show that was able to watch with their kids. And obviously, some people do come to me and say, oh, Andrew, like some of the characters in Meet the Adebanjos they're quite exaggerated. Not all Nigerians are like that. And that's very true. But people have to remember, it's a comedy.
Yes.
And in a comedy, we have to exaggerate, right? And it's about stereotypes. So what we did try to, as the seasons progressed, we tried to, be less stereotypical and focus more on, love, just the struggles of Nigerian parents trying to raise British kids, how difficult that is, and the misdirections, and how parents just don't understand. That was kind of our theme. Every time we were writing, I was like, let's go from the perspective that parents don't understand, and what chaos is that going to lead to. So I'm very proud of it. But back to YapTime, that's why I personally, someone asked me the other day, said, Andrew, what drives you? And it's really just impacting and benefiting in the community.
Yeah.
And I did that with Meet the Adebanjos, and that's why now I'm trying to tackle language, and hopefully that can touch someone and help them get closer.
So there's a common theme, there's a common thread with everything that you've done so far. So I guess, what did creating Meet the Adebanjos teach you about the economics of Africa-focused products?
Yeah, the thing I realized with Meet the Adebanjos, especially season 1, is African entertainment is hit-driven. So you need to build it into a hit. And what I mean by that is, if you're launching anything, go for audience first and money will come.
Mm-hmm.
So what we did is we lost money. Season 1, we lost money. We did deals with networks who didn't pay us. We were quite naive about some of the deals we structured. We were quite naive about how much money we would be able to generate from the show in the first season anyway. But the thing we did do was we made sure that we got as much exposure as possible for the show. So it was on the major TV nation networks in Nigeria. It was on the major TV networks in South Africa, Ghana, East Africa, and so on. So it became a hit on the continent. And because it's season one, and we were like crying in our beds, saying we've lost all this investor, and it was private investor money as well. And because it became such a local hit on the continent, one of the biggest African TV companies came to us and said, everyone's talking about this Meet the Adebanjos. You know what? If we pay you for your second season, would you license it to us exclusively for a period of time? So what we realized is what we lost in the first season, we was able to get back and more in the second season, but only because it had gained maximum exposure. And this is my message sometimes to a lot of creators at the moment. A lot of creators at the moment are too focused on the money in the beginning that they miss the exposure. And it's only through the exposure that you will get the money, right? So my message is, focus on, if you're launching something, it could be a podcast, it could be a YouTube channel, it could be a TV show, whatever it is. Just know your first season, your second season even, may not make you much money, but as long as you are getting some exposure, just keep going, because there will be that turning point where the exposure is so much that the money will follow.
Wise words. Thank you for that, Andrew. As you said, go for audience first and the money will follow. So if we shift back to YapTime in terms of the business side with that in mind, what has surprised you the most from the beta testing and early user feedback?
The first thing that surprised me is that people are willing to give it a go.
Yes.
And this really made me feel that there's that yearning to try something. And we are quite transparent. So we try and give, in the early days, we give people free trials just to get them, look, try it. We think this is amazing. But if you don't believe us, try it out for a day. And if you like it, you can continue. And I think that really helped gain people's trust of, okay, Andrew's prepared to back himself by saying, you know what, you can try, you can have a free lesson. And if you don't think it's connecting with you, no obligation to continue. And if you do, then you can sign up. So that was, I'm really indebted to people for at least giving me their time to do a free lesson. But finally, what's quite interesting is actually from the tutor's perspective, because every tutor I spoke to that I've hired initially told me it wouldn't work because it's not what they're taught. They're taught that you need to do half an hour lesson or you need to do an hour lesson. That's the only way someone's going to learn. All right. So it was almost untraining their mindset about learning and micro-learning and what does the student actually need. And I remember there was an interesting saying where someone said to me that, if you're giving a speech, 95% of your speech will be forgotten.
Wow.
And people only remember the 5%. If you listen to a podcast, 95% of the podcast, you'll forget what people have said. You'll get the general gist of it, but it'll only be like 5%. So I tried to strip it back to the tutors to say, look, you give an hour lesson, 90% of what you're teaching is going to be forgotten. So can we capture in 10 minutes that 5% that will actually be retained? And I think when I explain it like that, and when they started to see the results from the students, like they were on board, but they were actually the hardest people to get on the same program as us. That, look, short lessons make sense. And sometimes I still have to be like, when they're trying to, some tutors are like, no, I need to go a bit long. I need to give a 30-minute lesson. I'm like, no. Trust the process. It works.
So if we look ahead and fast forward, what would you say is your mission for YapTime? What role do you see it playing in empowering the diaspora communities around the world?
Yes, if you look at my overall vision, like I said, is to have as many African languages on board. My major, and I would love this to happen, is whatever we make from YapTime, we want to invest back into improving the links between Africa and the diaspora. Whether that's, if we're going to spend money on marketing, we spend money on, African influencers or, African events, African community centers. If we're going to work on trying to build, improve culture, we spend money on maybe after school, Saturday clubs for African languages or culture that kids can go to. And again, the only reason I'm thinking like this, and this is where sometimes, going through the different stages of your life, now that I'm a parent, I'm thinking, what would enhance? And my kids are so, because of obviously the popularization of like African music and culture, they're so curious, right? And I'm thinking, what more could we be doing to help fuel and fester that curiosity? So yeah, my big vision is if YapTime becomes successful, reinvesting that money back into the community so that it can really help empower and grow our youth of tomorrow.
So if we look at a wider space in terms of how do you see the broader African language learning market changing in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I see people trying different things. There's some fantastic companies that are out there that are doing really well in the space. I definitely see people going down the AI route. Again, I have my views on that. Like, if it's done in a way where I think nothing can replace native speakers, because native speakers can just go off script. Yes. I'm trying to speak Yoruba with my mum. Like, what I'm learning, she just goes off script and just starts talking in a different way or angle, and I have to be able to relate. And sometimes I freeze because I'm like, whoa, I didn't learn that way. And I think that's the difference between learning with a native speaker and learning with someone with AI. The fact that I've learned with a native speaker, the native speaker tells me, okay, when you're in this scenario, you speak like this. When you're in that scenario, you speak like that. And, freestyling a little bit. So I really do hope that all different methods, but in the future, I see AI playing a part in some companies' language learning techniques. But I do hope that the native speaker aspect remains.
Last question.
Quote of the week.
As people, we often have quotes, mantras, African proverbs or affirmations that keep us going when times are good or when times are challenging. Do you have one that you can share with us today?
Yeah, I do actually. And this is one from one of my favorite artists growing up, a rapper called DMX.
Yes.
I used to love DMX, man. Like, and for anyone who knows DMX, it was more of the authenticity. Obviously, yes. Some of the lyrics, I may not listen to those type of lyrics anymore, but it was the authenticity of where he was coming from, what he was talking about, his struggles, his pain, his grief. And there was this song he had, I think it's called Slipping.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, and just that chorus, I'm slipping, I'm falling, I've got to get up. And that, I've got to get up. That is almost my mantra, I'm slipping. Whatever situation you're in, whether you're slipping, you're falling, but you've got to get up. And that's what keeps me going. So whatever challenges I'm going to have, whatever difficulties I have, I'm going to overcome it. I've got to get up.
That definitely embodies the entrepreneurial spirit. Andrew, thank you for sharing that. That has been a fantastic conversation. Your journey definitely shows the power of reinvention, also cultural connection, and creating solutions that speak directly to the heart of the diaspora experiences and also putting the customer first. So well done. Fantastic. I know it's early days, but I'm also looking forward to seeing how YapTime develops and scales.
Great. No, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone who has listened and stayed tuned to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, or tell a friend about it. You can also rate, review us in Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcast. Thank you and see you next week for the Unlocking Africa podcast.